I think people like being frightened. I think they like exploring the darker side of humanity and looking into an environment they wouldn't normally, have access to, most likely. I think early on, the team would talk about what we found compelling in the horror genre, and far and away, The Shining was the movie that stood out for everyone as something that was uniquely horrific, yet not cheesy or ridiculous at the same time. It's a serious piece that is also intensely frightening. So we really wanted to create that same feeling of you're walking through an environment and then you're seeing visions of things that are you don't maybe understand right away, but over the course of the whole game, come to create a sort of a full picture of, one man's tortured soul and the horrible historic events that have taken place on this island. The island has had a colorful history, where there was a rock quarry that was used to build the prison. There was a beach where a ship wrecked. There's an old abandoned asylum, which is a Victorian home from the late 19th century. And that served two important functions, which was to keep the game environment varied over the course of the game and to allow us to sort of bring out history through recreating different architectural styles, or obviously a rock quarry is going to look very different than a beach and so forth.
The way we portrayed the history of the island was to give the player opportunities to find bits of the history as they progress through the game. And in doing so, they uncover sort of a more macro vision of the island's nature.
We didn't really want a character that looked any particular nationality or race. He really is almost Neanderthal in his appearance. He's very primal. We wanted that strength to kind of come through, so we built up some of those characteristics.
A tough character that no matter what he was doing, he always came through as like a really solid, calm, tough guy. And then he looked cool no matter what he was doing. Like he was just shooting a gun, he looked good shooting a gun, and he looked tough and carried out an attitude throughout.
I think the primary thing we want to do is make the player feel that though they were in this intensely frightening and life-threatening situation, they were in control of a character that could make it through if only they were able to manage it themselves. It's not like in some horror movies where the main characters are sort of weak and constantly tripping over roots as they're trying to run away from the guy, and they can just barely manage to survive. Torque is someone who can take on an army of creatures and blast them to bloody bits and then be ready for more.
Well, the thing with Blood is it's actually a lot like a shadow map in terms of projecting geometry onto another object. So we basically take our Blood texture map, we figure out what objects collided with, and we send it through a projection matrix, and it ends up being rendered on top of the other geometry, looking like it's actually attached to it. There's actually a whole series of different effects and objects that come into play. We have everything from blood that sprays onto the wall behind you. We have the player actually will have blood spray onto him. He will be covered from face to toe. We have the enemy that you're hitting, of course, gets damaged. You can lose limbs, you can lose your head. It really feels like you're actually doing physical damage to the world.
Something that was also important to me was to explore sort of the relationship between corrections officers and inmates. Since it is a prison environment, there's a lot of tension there between these sort of two factions, neither of which has really complete control over the prison.
Oh, he won't say. Claims he blacked the whole thing out. A likely story. The needle's too good for him. Filthy inmate, they should all die.
A likely story. The needle's too good for him. Filthy inmate, they should all die.
Since we were going for sort of a continuous immersive experience, we didn't have the benefit of mission screens or voiceover narration or something helping the player along. So it was a real challenge to sort of get the characters to both talk in a way that's realistic and also in a way that'll convey the story to the player.
Welcome to Carnate, inmates. Enjoy your stay.
Once the cataclysm happens and the creatures are everywhere, the corrections officers are really on the same side you are. From the beginning, we wanted to stay away from zombies and the more tired horror cliches that everyone's had enough of. and wanted to move on to something that was more disturbing and more unique to this experience. I think it was also early on we decided we wanted to have a theme for all the creatures so that they weren't just, this random Cthulhu monster or this random apparition. Instead, they're each themed after different execution methods, which ties into the history of Carnate and all the various forms of humans killing humans that have gone on there.
Creatures, we wanted to make them as creepy as possible, make them feel very intimidating and deadly. We had a lot of inspiration for a lot of the creatures from movies like House on Haunted Hill and old Geiger stuff.
It really actually fell on probably one of the sickest character designers I've ever met, Ben. So he really tore it up and really was the inspiration for every one of these character designs. They really started to come home and really started to really have some depth to them once the sound got in. I have to say the sound is probably one of the most amazing pieces of work that's been put into this game. It's incredible.
I worked with the composer to come up with sort of a hybrid idea there where we would extract the elements for the music from the sound design. Objects that were made of various elements, stone, steel, things that had long tones. We were using aluminum rods that were 10 and 12 feet long and getting them to resonate lengthwise. We were then striking them and getting them to resonate horizontally. Just about anything we could think of to create sonic signatures that were not typically used in game soundtracks.
The biggest thing I hope the players bring to the game is their own sort of creativity. We've created sort of a world that the player can explore and can see the various historical events, but at the same time we were fairly careful not to explain too much to the player. So there's going to be a lot of sort of connecting the dots and putting your own spin on, well, I think this is what happened here, or understanding Torg's backstory. Different players may see it differently, and that's important since you are Torg going through the game.